I knew something was wrong the moment I heard the metal groan. It wasn't the usual creak of trees in the wind or the soft clink of wildlife brushing against wire. It was sharp, intentional. Like something old and sacred was being torn apart. While the sun still slept, I was out the door in flannel pajama pants and worn boots before the sound even stopped echoing down the slope. What I saw next, 3 men in neon vests, tugging at the reinforced corner of my forest fence, pulling it down like it was nothing but scrap. That would change everything. My name's Elijah Brody. I'm 62 years old. Retired U.S. Forest Service officer. And for the past 18 years, I've lived alone in a cedar-framed cabin that backs up to the wild. Not metaphorically, I mean real wilderness. The kind where the trees speak and the dirt remembers things. My late wife Sarah, I built this place with our bare hands before cancer took her in 2007. Every plank, every beam was chosen, measured, planted with purpose. When she died, I didn't move out. Couldn't. Because when you lose someone that close, their absence doesn't leave a hole. It becomes the air. And this cabin, this land, still breathed her in. The forest fence wasn't some decorative split rail postcard. It was a line, a hard one, between us and what lived beyond. Wild boars, not pigs, not cartoon mascots. We're talking invasive, violent, sunder-traveling monsters. I've seen them tear through a hillside like rot through fruit. Once, one of them chased a fawn onto our deck. I'll never forget the sound, a crash, a squeal, and then the sickening crack of railings snapping like matchsticks. That night I reinforced everything. Rough-hewn cedar posts, tension steel wire, pipes sank 3 feet deep. That barrier held for 16 years. And then came the horror, pressed pillows, clipboards, smiles to polish. To be sincere, I should have known. The second they started snooping around that they weren't here to welcome, they were here to take. Pine Hollow Beautification Board, they called themselves. As if planting petunias and banning porch flags gave them the right to decide what belonged and what didn't. When Sarah and I bought this place, there was no horror. The subdivision came later. A developer bought the adjacent slope and squeezed 16 houses into it between 2013 and 2018. That's when the rules changed. That's when my grandfathered property became, in their words, non-compliant at first. It was little things, a letter about the mailbox not matching the community aesthetic, then about my shed, which they had the nerve to call an unapproved agricultural structure. Then came the letter about the barrier, to pages of bureaucratic nonsense, violation of Section 1C, unauthorized fencing, aesthetic disruption, no mention of wildlife, no acknowledgement of safety, just language soaked in arrogance and ignorance. I left a voicemail explaining everything, who I was, what I'd done for decades, why that fence mattered. They didn't respond, not with a call, not with an explanation. Just a final warning letter and a $500 fine if I didn't remove the barrier in 30 days. They underestimated me. I sent back my own letter, certified mail, 3 pages, single-spaced, citing state and county wildlife management codes, for migration data, even photos of previous damage. It was professional, direct, and absolutely ignored. By midsummer, their vultures arrived, HOA. Representatives driving slowly by my property, snapping photos, taking notes. One even dared to point a camera at me while I was digging tomatoes. I waved. He didn't wave back. And then came the sound, the roar of a backhoe at dawn. Contractors tearing down my fence like it was some unwanted hedge. No legal notice, no sheriff. Just a printed horror work order. They didn't care about the forest. They didn't care about safety. They cared about power, control, uniformity. And the forest, oh, the forest noticed. I swear to you, those boars were watching from the tree line that morning, eyes glinting, waiting. 3 days later, the neighborhood Facebook group lit up. My trash was overturned, claw marks on the porch, a blurry photo. Is this a pig? It was in my backyard when I let the dog out, and it escalated. By the weekend, 5 sightings, 2 car accidents, 1 dog injured. And the horror? They blamed me. They hand-delivered a notice. No letterhead this time. Just typed desperation. You are responsible for ensuring your land does not pose a hazard to the broader community. Responsibility. They tore down the only thing keeping the hazard out. And now they wanted me to fix it. That night, I didn't sleep. I wrote, I gathered evidence. Security cam timestamps, deed copies, more wildlife documentation. Then I CC'd it to everyone who might listen. Local news, the mayor's office, wildlife services, even a legal contact from my conservation testimony days. And by the next morning, my inbox wasn't empty. They wanted a war of aesthetics. But they were about to learn what happens when you pick a fight with a man who's spent his life understanding wild things. Especially the kind that don't wear tusks, but clipboards. The night after I sent that packet, the air around Pine Hollow shifted, like the forest itself was holding its breath. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee the next morning when I got the first reply. Single-line email from Karen Owens at Wildlife Services. They're poking the wrong bear. Eli, let me know how we can help. I hadn't heard from Karen in years. She was one of the few people who still remembered the old conservation hearings, the ones where we fought tooth and nail to get invasive species regulations passed statewide. She didn't reach out unless something mattered, and clearly, this mattered. But the horror didn't back down. No, they doubled down. They plastered red paper fires on every mailbox, emergency community meeting, mandatory attendance, public safety concerns. HOA leadership to address urgent developments. They made it sound like I was a threat, like I was the reason the boars were now turning up on swing sets and driveways and chewing through irrigation systems. That night, I pulled on my cleanest shirt. The one Sarah had patched at the shoulder so many years ago. I brushed the dust off my old forestry badge, clipped it to my belt, and walked down to the community clubhouse, not because they'd ordered me to, but because it was time they heard the truth from the man they were trying to silence. The room was packed. Standing room only, parents bouncing toddlers on hips. Retirees gripping note cards with trembling hands. I counted 3 police officers by the doors, all in uniform, eyes scanning the crowd like they were expecting a riot. Janice Mallory stood at the front of the room, the queen of artificial order. Glossy hair, manicured nails, flawless white blouse with a brooch shaped like a pinnacle. She looked like someone who'd never knelt in soil a day in her life. She clicked through a PowerPoint. Damaged yards, scratched siding. A child's tricycle flipped over near claw marks. This is a crisis, she said, her voice rich with self-importance. And it began with one man's refusal to follow community guidelines. Eyes turned to me. I didn't flinch. She waved a packet in the air. This fencing, she declared, and approved, and authorized. Non-compliant. Not once did she say necessary. Not once did she say protective. She didn't even say the word force. So I stepped forward. I didn't raise my voice, didn't slam papers on the podium. I simply placed a folder on the stand and opened it to the first page. A photo from my security cam. This was taken 3 days before your contractors demolished the barrier, I said calmly. That's a sounder of boars at the tree line. Watching, waiting, gas rippled through the room. The next photo. The Pattersons' backyard, a boar, tusks gleaming. Inches from a toddler's sandbox. This, I said, flipping pages, was taken the morning after. I warned Wildlife Services. I warned this board. And I warned you, Janice. She blinked hard. This is not a story about noncompliance, I said. This is a story about negligence. Dead silence. Then an older man in the back, one of the original residents, asked the question that had been sitting on everyone's tongue. So what are you gonna do about it, Mr. Brody? I looked him in the eye. I'm going to make sure they can't do it to anyone else. The next morning, I brewed my coffee stronger. Something about standing in front of a room full of people and daring to speak truth to power. It stays with you, and my phone, it didn't stop ringing. Some calls were angry, most weren't. They were grateful, they were awake. One message stood out. Carlos Ramirez, retired city attorney, lived up the hill. We'd only exchanged nods before, but his voicemail was clear. Elijah, I saw what happened. I've dealt with this kind of thing before. If you want to talk strategy, I'm here. Strategy. That word hit different, because I realized then, this wasn't just about me anymore. It wasn't about offense, or even the BOARS. It was about precedent. If they could bulldoze a legally sound, ecologically critical structure on my land without legal order, they could do it to anyone. I called Carlos right after lunch. We met on his porch, the pine wind curling between us like an old friend. He already had files laid out. They didn't follow due process, he said. No court order, no legal jurisdiction over your land. Under California Penal Code Section 602, that's trespassing. We're also looking at unlawful destruction of property and possibly tortious interference. I blinked. I want to stop them, not just for me, for everyone who's ever been fined for a flag, silenced for a shed, punished for planting tomatoes. Carlos smiled slowly. Then let's give them a civics lesson. We worked for 3 straight days. Evidence, photos, security footage, old letters, HOA documents. Karen from Wildlife Services sent to sign memos backing up my case. One detailed the boar threat. The other confirmed that demolishing the barrier had directly led to the spike in wildlife incidents. Then Carlos found the clause, buried in the HOA's own documents. A single line, any property not included in the original HOA development plan shall not be brought under jurisdiction without a majority homeowner vote. Guess what? No vote had ever happened. They thought you'd never check, Carlos said. They counted on you folding. I didn't fold. We sent the cease and desist out loud, clear, legally binding. We filed the civil suit next, trespassing, property, destruction, reckless endangerment. Carlos insisted I speak at the hearing. Because they need to hear it from you, he said, from the man they tried to erase. So I did. I told the judge about Sarah, the cabin, the first boar incident, how I reinforced the land, why that fence mattered. And how, in one morning of arrogance and ignorance, it was all ripped away, unleashing chaos not just on me, but on every family in Pine Hollow. The judge ordered her full evidentiary review and issued an injunction. The HOA was barred from enforcing anything on my land without a legal mandate. It wasn't the end, but it was a start. In the neighborhood, something began to change. People spoke again. They shared stories, fines for solar lights, warnings over porch chairs, flags, paint colors, small injustices, now magnified by what had happened to me. Then came the envelope. No return address. Inside, printed screenshots of horror emails. One line from Janice stood out. He keeps quoting wildlife codes like he's sheriff of the woods. If we don't act fast, we'll lose the entire east boundary. There it was. Proof. They hadn't acted out of safety or community interest. They wanted control. They wanted my land. 2 days later, I heard the diesel engine again. I stood at my kitchen sink, coffee mid-pour, as a flatbed with a bulldozer crept up my drive, followed by 2 pickups and a black SUV with HOA magnets slapped on both doors. Even after the injunction, they came back, but this time, I was ready. Phone in hand, camera rolling. The contractor looked nervous, young, beard twitching, paperwork shaking in his hand. You Elijah Brody? He asked. I am. I said. Who sent you? He pointed to the SUV. Janice Mallory stepped out, tennis outfit and all, clipboard like a dagger. Elijah, she said sweetly, we're not here to fight. You brought a bulldozer. It's a safety precaution. Overgrowth along your eastern edge presents a wildfire risk. Still under legal review, I said. Still my land. She gave a careless shrug. We have community interests to protect. And then I stepped forward, pulled the folded paper from my back pocket. You so much as scratch my dirt, and you're complicit in unlawful trespass, I said, voice even. The contractor read the injunction. backed away slowly. Janice's face turned red. Elijah, don't be dramatic. That was her mistake. Because right then, another truck pulled up. Deputy Nolan Burke, County Sheriff's Office. He surveyed the scene like a man already tired of everyone involved. Miss Mallory, he said, walking toward the bulldozer, you and your crew need to leave. Now, we're protecting the neighborhood, she argued. Then protect it from the sidewalk, she sputtered. If I see you here again before the case is resolved, Nolan said, I'll arrest you for contempt and trespass. And just like that, she turned, barked into her phone, climbed back into her SUV. The convoy retreated, bulldozer and all. They came to tear something down, but they left watching something stronger rise. By the afternoon, the video went viral in the neighborhood forum. Comments poured in. She tried again, even after a court order. What was she thinking? We need to call a meeting. This has gone too far. The next day, flyers appeared, not from the HOA, from the residents. Enough is enough. Community forum tonight. No HOA approval needed. And this time, it wasn't just about fences. It was about something deeper. Something louder than regulations. Something wilder than the woods. It was about people remembering their voice. The park by the lake hadn't seen a crowd like that in years, not since the summer bonfire back in 2015. But this wasn't s'mores and sparklers. This was righteous anger soaked into every folding chair and blanket on the grass. 73 households showed up, not a single HOA representative among them, which said more than if they had. I stood in the back at first, watching, letting others speak. Parents with sleepless eyes, veterans who'd been fined for flags, elderly neighbors who had lived through 3 boards and dozens of warning letters. And then someone, I think it was little Emma's mom, asked me to come forward. I didn't prepare a speech. Didn't need to. I stepped onto a picnic table. Boots dusty, voice low and steady. I didn't start this for power, I said, as scanning the crowd. I started it because they tore down something that kept us safe. And then they blamed me when the danger arrived. People murmured, nodded. But this isn't just about me anymore. It's not about boards or fences or fines for mulch. Color, I paused. Let it hang there. It's about whether we're willing to let people make decisions for us while refusing to listen to us. Whether we'll keep being quiet when our dignity gets steamrolled under the weight of clipboards and bylaws. Silence, that kind you can feel in your chest. Then a voice cut through from the edge of the crowd. Troy, from the cul-de-sac. What can we do about it? That's when he raised a clipboard of his own. We call a recall vote. Gasps, whispers, a ripple of possibility. Can we even do that? Someone asked. Yes, Troy replied, holding up a copy of the bylaws. Section 4D. If 25% of homeowners sign a petition, we can call for a full board recall. A vote. Legal. Binding. Pens came out like lightning. Clipboards passed from hand to hand like torches. And by the time the stars were out, we had 94 signatures. More than enough. We didn't cheer. We didn't shout. But we looked each other in the eye for the first time in a long while. That meant more. Because the HOA had fired the first shot when they bulldozed that fence. But we were the ones building something in return. That night, as I walked home under the dark silhouettes of pine trees, I thought of Sarah again. I could almost feel her hand in mine. Her laugh, soft in the wind. I touched the smooth cedar plank she once carved our initials into, and made myself a promise. This wouldn't end with a vote. It would end with something better. 2 nights later, my phone rang at 11:58 p.m. It was dispatched from the sheriff's office. The voice on the other end sounded winded. Mr. Brody, we've got multiple calls coming in from Pine Hollow Circle. Reports of wildlife, possibly hogs, 6 households. In the last 30 minutes, I was already out the door before she finished. Boots, flashlight, radio scanner clipped to my belt. The kind of stillness hung in the air that you only feel before something breaks. The trees didn't sway, the wind didn't whisper, it just waited. When I pulled into the neighborhood center, blue lights flickered across lawns, broken fences, shredded flower beds, a woman in a robe crying, her hands bleeding where she tripped running back inside, a man limping, holding the shattered handle of a rake. They were huge. The woman sobbed. They charged straight through, snorting, smashing things. They didn't stop. By the time animal control arrived, it was chaos. 3 cars damaged, 1 person with a sprained ankle, 1 with a bruised hip, 8 homes with visible property destruction. But it could have been worse. I followed the tracks with Nolan, hoof prints overlapping through the rain basin at the edge of the neighborhood. They led straight from the eastern forest line, the exact gap where the barrier used to stand. Nolan didn't say much, just looked at the churned up earth and muttered, "You were right." But it didn't feel like vindication. It felt like the warning had finally screamed loud enough to be heard. By the next morning, the photos hit local news. Wild boars invade Pine Hollow. Property destroyed. Injuries reported. They didn't sensationalize it. They didn't need to. The pictures spoke for themselves. A trampoline ripped to pieces. Blood on a porch swing. Garbage shredded across 3 front yards. Karen Owens arrived around noon with 2 wildlife techs. They set up trail cams, laid baited traps, and issued an official advisory. Her press statement was short but brutal. The removal of natural and artificial barriers has disrupted the migratory patterns of invasive species. We strongly advise residents to avoid outdoor activity after dark and report all sightings immediately. She didn't name the horror. She didn't have to. Everyone already knew. That afternoon, an emergency town hall was held at the high school gymnasium to fit the crowd. Janice tried to speak. She came with charts, a slideshow, a shaky intern reading mitigation strategies like they could fix the mess with bullet points and mulch. But the room wasn't having it. The first to stand was a young mother, clutching her child's teddy bear. "My 5-year-old found blood on his swing this morning," she said, voice trembling. "You told us this was about neighborhood beauty." Next, a retired firefighter. "Mr. Ellis, I warned you 3 months ago. I told you that fence was the only thing keeping them out. You laughed." More voices followed. More truth. Until finally, someone in the crowd asked the question that sent shivers up my spine. "When's the recall vote?" Janice went pale. Trey stood up. "Saturday, 4 p.m. Community Clubhouse. Ballot style, monitored, transparent, legal under HOA bylaws." Janice tried to speak again, but this time Troy shut her down with one line. "This isn't about your bylaws anymore. It's about survival." She sat down, didn't say another word. That evening, I walked the edge of my property with a thermos in one hand and my sidearm in the other. The forest was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that makes you feel safe. The kind that waits, that watches. I stared at the spot where the barrier used to stand. Open now. Vulnerable. But strangely, not hopeless. Because something had shifted, not just in the woods. In the people. And just when I thought the night was done, I heard footsteps on the slope behind my cabin. 6 kids, maybe more. Some with braces, some with backpacks. One of them, Emma's older brother, carried a post-hole digger slung over his shoulder like a soldier. "Mr. Brody." One of them called out, hesitant, "Can we help put it back?" I didn't know what to say. So I handed them gloves, and we started digging. No orders. No fines. No board approval. Just neighbors, just kids, just people rebuilding what had never needed to be destroyed. The forest had broken loose, but so had the truth, and truth, once exposed, is a lot harder to fence in than even a pack of wild boars. The morning of the recall vote, the air sat heavy over Pine Hollow, like the town itself was holding its breath. Every mailbox bore the same flyer: recall vote, Saturday, 4 p.m. Community Clubhouse, registered homeowners only, transparent, ballot count. It was all legal, all according to Section 4D of the HOA bylaws, and yet, it still felt like we were planning a revolution. The clubhouse hadn't seen this much traffic since the 4th of July pancake breakfast in 2019. But there were no balloons today, no syrup or songs, just tension and truth packed into every step across the walkway. I arrived early. Sandra Lee stood at the entrance, clipboard in hand, wearing the face of a woman who knew the weight of what she was helping orchestrate. "You ready?" she asked. "As I'll ever be," I said. Inside, volunteers moved like a quiet army. Voter rolls, ID checks, sealed envelopes, transparent ballot boxes watched over by 3 rotating residents, and Deputy Nolan, in uniform, standing tall in the corner. We weren't taking any chances. Neither were they. Carlos Ramirez, my legal counsel and now friend, stood at the back, in a plain blue polo, sipping coffee like a man who already knew the checkmate had been played. Janice showed up late. She wore dark sunglasses, as if they could shield her from what was coming, and walked straight to the front like she still held power. But this time, no one stood when she entered. No one greeted her. She stood alone. At 4 p.m. sharp, we closed the doors and began the count. No shouting, no dramatics, just sorting, unfolding, tallying, number by number. The silence wasn't awkward. It was electric, like a fuse burning towards something explosive. Sandra stepped onto the small stage with the microphone in hand. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied like a bridge under pressure. "We had 168 eligible households participate in today's vote," she said. "The bylaws require 60% in favor for a full recall." She paused. The room leaned forward. The final count to 112 in favor, 37 opposed. For one heartbeat, there was silence. Then the room erupted. Not in chaos, in relief, laughter, applause, tears, neighbors hugging neighbors, people clapping strangers on the back. I felt hands grip my shoulders, arms pull me into tight, emotional embraces. Not because I had won, but because we had. Carlos leaned in and whispered, "It's done. You just made history in this zip code." Across the room, Janice didn't move. Her mouth was tight. Her sunglasses stayed on, but her hands had started to tremble. She knew this wasn't just a vote. It was a verdict. Sandra continued, "The current HOA board is hereby dissolved, effective immediately. Interim board members will be selected from volunteer residents. A new election will be held in 30 days. More applause. Trey raised his arm and called out, "For the barrier." Laughter followed. The tension cracked open like brittle bark in a storm, and in its place came something else: unity. We didn't stay in the clubhouse long. The moment the results were final, the crowd spilled into the cul-de-sac like a block party. Coolers, folding chairs, music from car stereos. Someone brought her grill. Even Deputy Nolan showed up off-duty, laughing with Troy and tossing a football to someone's teenager. Karen arrived with a small bottle of cider. "Guess you got your line redrawn," she said, toasting me. Guess I did. That night, I sat on my porch and looked out at the new barrier line. Solid, reinforced, clean. Safe. But the calm I felt didn't come from the steel or the cedar. It came from something else. It came from knowing that when one person stands, others might follow. Not always loudly, not always immediately, but with hearts that recognize justice when they see it. And that changes everything. The Monday after the vote, I drove to the courthouse with Carlos. We carried a folder thick with evidence, photos, correspondence, legal citations, Karen's wildlife reports, Nolan's body cam footage, even the screenshots from that anonymous envelope, the ones where Janice admitted she wanted to seize control of the land. We weren't filing another civil suit this time. We were taking it further. This was a formal complaint to the district attorney's office: criminal trespass, destruction of private property, falsifying jurisdiction, and something darker: financial misconduct. Turns out, the HOA's books weren't just messy, they were dirty. Unauthorized landscaping contracts, inflated vendor charges, payments to a shell company called Civic Harmony Solutions. Carlos had a contact at the county assessor's office. That shell company, registered under Janice's husband's name. By midweek, the Pine County Register ran a front-page headline: HOA board ousted after wildlife disaster. investigates potential charges. I didn't expect the mayor to reach out. But he did. Called me personally. Elijah, he said carefully. I've been following what happened. I think we have an opportunity here, one that could change how we manage wildland boundaries throughout the district. What kind of opportunity? I asked. A task force. Community-led. You chair it, me. You're the only person in this area with real forest management experience and first-hand HOA fallout. We've had complaints for years, but your case finally pierced the noise. That night, I sat on the porch and stared at the tree line. Did I want to lead another committee after all the fighting? But then I thought of Emma's question. Will the boars come back? They would, because nature doesn't operate on recall votes. And if I could keep this from happening to another community, maybe it was worth it. So I said, yes. The first task force meeting was held at City Hall, not the clubhouse. 12 chairs, wildlife biologists, fire mitigation experts, landowners. Even a few reform HOA members who'd voted for the recall and wanted to help fix the damage. We drafted real change, new guidelines for developments near wildland, mandatory wildlife impact assessments, emergency preparedness audits, limitations on aesthetic regulations when safety structures, like my barrier, were involved. It was bureaucratic work, but it gave the chaos meaning. Meanwhile, the investigation escalated. Two of the former board members, lawyer Ep. Janice, she disappeared. No press appearances, no statements. Rumor was she tried to move out of state, but a subpoena stopped her, one tied to an entirely new case, this time involving fraud. 3 weeks later, I stood once more at the edge of my land. The new barrier arced along the slope, stronger than before. Stone footings, crossbeams. We'd even planted rosemary and lavender at the base. Natural deterrents that made the forest smell more like memory than menace. I didn't build it alone. Families helped. Teenagers who'd never swung a hammer. Retirees with aching knees. Even Mr. Ellis, the old firefighter, showed up with elbow braces and stubborn pride. It wasn't my fence anymore. It was ours. And the forest, now respectfully willed and welcomed, felt quieter somehow. That morning, I spotted a sounder of boars beyond the tree line. They didn't approach, didn't test the wire. They just moved on. As they vanished into the shadows, I turned and saw Emma drawing with chalk on the new path. When she noticed me, she waved. My mom says we're safe now. I smiled, not because the danger was gone, but because we finally had people who recognized it. That afternoon, I received a small package in the mail, no return address. Inside, a broken piece of cedar post, and a note written in tight, slanted handwriting. I was wrong. I see it now. The barrier wasn't the problem. We were. May your next boundary never be crossed. There was no signature, but I didn't need one, and I didn't need an apology to feel peace, because what we reclaimed wasn't just land. It was our voice, our place, our dignity, and we won it not through shouting, but through truth spoken clearly, calmly, unapologetically. And when truth speaks like that, even wild things and would-be tyrants learn to listen. The hearing was scheduled for Monday morning at 9 o'clock a.m. Courtroom 3B. All oak-paneled walls, rows of creaky benches. The kind of place where justice either walks in with its boots on or stays trapped behind. Procedure. Carlos and I arrived early. He wore his courtroom tie, the same navy one he said he wore when the truth mattered more than the theatrics. I wore my Forest Service badge, clip on my belt, not because I needed it, but because I wanted them to remember who they were dealing with. We weren't the only ones who showed up. The gallery filled quickly. Some came in suits, others in jeans and old neighborhood t-shirts. Parents, retirees, veterans, teenagers who'd helped dig post holes, people who'd been fined for hanging wind chimes or planting tomatoes, people who had never stepped into a courtroom in their lives. But today, they came to witness something rare. Accountability. The case was Brody v. Pine Hollow HOA former board members Janice Mallory and Christopher Dobbins. The rest of the board had quietly settled, paid fines, signed papers, walked away without another word. But not Janice. No, she came in like she still held the gavel, gray suit, crisp blouse, hair pulled tight enough to stretch skin. She didn't look at anyone in the room, not even the residents she'd accused, fined, silenced. Her attorney walked beside her, younger, sweating already. Judge Peterson took the bench, silver hair, steel eyes, zero tolerance for performance. Carlos opened. He didn't shout. He didn't pound. He unfolded photo after photo. The barrier before, the destruction after. Time-stamped security footage. Wildlife reports from Karen, my original cease and desist. Letter, the anonymous email screenshots. Then, Nolan's body cam footage. The second time the bulldozer came, the courtroom went still as the video played. Janice standing on my land. Me presenting the injunction. Her insisting the bulldozer proceed anyway. Nolan's warning. Her retreat. When the video ended, the judge didn't move for a full 3 seconds. Then Carlos laid out the financials. Civic Harmony Solutions, shell company, fake invoices, funds funneled into her husband's name. Not speculation. Documentation. By the time he sat down, even the walls seemed to breathe differently. Janice's attorney rose slowly. His hands shook slightly as he adjusted his jacket. To be clear, Your Honor, he said, voice thin, the board's actions were not malicious, perhaps misinformed, misguided, but always executed with intent to protect community standards and safety. Judge Peterson raised a single eyebrow. You mean, bulldozing a private barrier on titled land without a court order was an act of community protection? No, Your Honor, I only meant to clarify. You do not deny that your client authorized the equipment onto Mr. Brody's property after being legally notified not to? The attorney hesitated. No, Your Honor, and you do not deny that the board's removal of said barrier preceded a series of wildlife incursions, property damage, and injuries within Pine Hollow? No, Your Honor. The judge closed the file in front of her with a deliberate clap of wood against wood. She turned to Janice. Miss Mallory, do you have anything to say before I issue ruling? Janice stood, her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. I believed I was doing what was right for the neighborhood, she said. Her voice didn't crack, it curled, like she was still trying to frame this as noble. I didn't understand the ecological implications. I was acting in the interest of order. The judge tilted her head. You were provided multiple reports. You received warnings. You were sent to cease and desist. This wasn't ignorance, Miss Mallory. It was arrogance, a beat. Then the ruling came, in light of the evidence. I find in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. Elijah Brody. No chairs, no clapping. Just breath. A collective exhale from every person in that room. But Judge Peterson wasn't finished. I am ordering full restitution for the cost of barrier reconstruction, ecological mitigation expenses, and all legal fees incurred. Furthermore, she looked directly at Janice. I am referring this case to the district attorney's office for consideration of criminal charges, trespassing, willful destruction of private property, and fraudulent use of HOA authority for personal or financial gain. That last line, that landed like thunder. Carlos leaned toward me and whispered, she's not playing softball. Janice sat back down, her face pale. Her sunglasses, the one she hadn't worn that day, wouldn't have saved her now. After adjournment, I walked outside into sunlight, warm, real, cleansing. The crowd followed. Some clapped my shoulder, others said nothing, just gave that small nod. The one men give when words fail, but respect DOES and single quotes T. Sandra found me at the steps. We're holding a community dinner this weekend, she said. At the park, everyone wants you there. I smiled. Is there pie? 3 kinds. She grinned. Carlos emerged next. He'd already packed his papers. You did good, he said. You didn't just win a case, Elijah. You changed how this town sees itself. I looked back at the old courtroom doors. They tried to bury me in paperwork, I said. But they forgot I'd spent my life studying what survives after the Fire. That night, I stood again at the edge of the rebuilt barrier. The sun dipped low. Golden light spread across the post like approval. Behind me, I could hear laughter. Music. Dogs barking. Not fear. Not tension. But life. The wild had come close, but it hadn't won. And neither had those who tried to rule the neighborhood with a clipboard and a blindfold. Because this wasn't about fences anymore. It was about boundaries. And about learning, as a town, as neighbors, to defend them, not just from animals, but from people who forget that power has limits. Because when truth finally speaks, even the loudest lies start to sound small. 3 months after the hearing, Pine Hollow didn't look the same. The trees still whispered in the wind. The barriers still stood strong, cedar and still hugging the forest's edge. But it wasn't the land that had changed the most. It was the people. Gone was the clipped, polished silence that used to hang in the air, the kind that told you your neighbor's smile came with a clause, that your mailbox was being judged behind drawn curtains. Now, there were voices again, children, laughing, radios playing on porches, conversations drifting over fences once used only as boundaries. And me, I was still rising at dawn, still drinking black coffee from the chipped mug Sarah bought me at our 5th anniversary, still walking the line of my land every morning, boots steady on pine needles and stone. But I wasn't walking alone anymore. At least once a week, someone would join me. Troy with his dog, Emmer with her sidewalk chalk, Deputy Nolan on his day off. Sometimes we said nothing, just listened to the forest breathe. That quiet, the right kind, had come back. The old HOA clubhouse. It didn't stay empty. We turned it into something better. It was now the Pine Hollow Community Resource Center. No board meetings, no fines, just neighbors helping neighbors. Sandra managed the calendar, fire safety classes, wildlife awareness, vegetable gardening. We even held a fence rebuild day for 3 families who lived near the tree line but couldn't afford materials. A local lumberyard donated the wood after hearing our story on the radio. Volunteers showed up from 3 counties. Over, the barrier wasn't just a structure anymore. It was a symbol of what we'd survived, of what we'd chosen to protect, not just from the wild, but from ourselves. And then something unexpected happened. A letter arrived in my mailbox. No return address. Inside, a personal check for $320 and a handwritten note in narrow, slanted cursive. While I voted against the recall, I believed what they told me. I was wrong. Please use this to help someone else finish rebuilding. I stared at it for a long time. Not because of the money, but because of what it meant. Even the loudest opposition could soften, could return, could change. I took the check to Sandra. She used it to install a memorial bench in the park, carved with a message I helped her write. Between us and the storm, it wasn't for me. It was for all of us. The night of the community potluck, I stood at the grill flipping burgers beside Mr. Ellis, who now insisted everyone call him the mayor of Brisket. Kids ran past with glow sticks. Emma held court on a picnic blanket, showing other children how to draw wild boars that don't get through fences. Carlos arrived late, as always, and handed me a folded newspaper from the next county over. The headline made me laugh. Small town overthrows HOA rebuilds stronger. The photo, me, standing in front of the barrier, hands on my hips. I wasn't posing. I'd just finished hammering in a new gate when the reporter showed up. Famous now, Carlos teased. Infamous, maybe. We sat under string lights strung between trees, music floating from someone's Bluetooth speaker. After a while, Carlos grew quiet. Then he said, "You know what made the difference, Elijah?" I looked at him. "You didn't fight them to win," he said. "You fought them to protect." And people saw the difference. I didn't know how to respond. So I just nodded. The fire crackled beside us. Someone played an old country song I hadn't heard since Sarah was alive. And for a second, just one, I could almost feel her there again. Not in a ghostly way. In a complete way. As if her laughter had never left this place. The next morning, I woke up early, like always, and pulled on my boots. I walked the line. At the eastern edge, the new gate stood tall, reinforced steel, bolt latch, so solid even a bear couldn't pry it open. On the inside, I'd carved something simple into the wood with my forestry knife. We keep what we respect. Behind me, the house stood quiet. Before me, the forest waited. But inside me, peace. Not the kind that comes from retreat, the kind that comes after the fire, when what's left is stronger than what stood before, when neighbors become something more than faces behind shutters, when voices that once trembled begin to rise, not alone, but together. A week later, I received a call from a small town 40 miles north. Their HOA had just passed a regulation banning all perimeter fencing due to aesthetic concerns. The caller, a woman named Paula, mother of 2, lived near the woods. Boars had already been spotted twice. I heard what happened in Pine Hollow, she said. I was wondering if you might speak at our community meeting. I said yes, because what happened here? It wasn't just a story about fences. It was a story about boundaries. About dignity. About the difference between silence and peace. And if someone else was just starting their fight, I wasn't going to let them feel alone. Not like I did in the beginning. Not again. It was late October when the subpoena finally landed. A courier dropped it off at Janice Mallory's door just after dawn. No warning, no courtesy, just a thick white envelope, heavy with everything she thought she could outrun. Inside, a court summons, this time, not civil, criminal inquiry, misuse of HOA authority, trespassing, property destruction, fraudulent contracting practices, and worst of all, financial misconduct tied to public safety violations. The community didn't cheer. They didn't need to. By now, Janice's name had become a cautionary whisper. Even her closest defenders, the ones who once shouted standards and aesthetics, had gone silent. The truth had spread too far. And it wasn't just our neighborhood anymore. Local news picked up the story again, then regional outlets. Then a national housing watchdog featured it in a full segment, The Fence That Broke the Board. They interviewed wildlife biologists, HOA reform attorneys, and even Karen from Wildlife Services, who, when asked on camera, simply said, "Sometimes people forget the land came first," and people were listening. One by one, other neighborhoods reached out, some seeking advice, others just needing to hear it was possible, to push back, to organize, to hold the clipboard class accountable. Sandra began hosting monthly community nights at the new center, one focused on knowing your rights, another on fireproofing homes near forest lines, a third on mental health in communities worn down by years of silent, imposed control. Pine Hollow had once been built around compliance. Now, it was growing, round connection. But even in the midst of healing, there were still echoes. The boars hadn't returned in force, not since the barrier was rebuilt. But we remained vigilant. Cameras stayed mounted. Traps stayed baited. Signs reminded visitors to stay cautious along the trail that skirted the eastern edge. We had learned something vital, that wildness doesn't always show up in hooves and tusks. Sometimes it wears heels and a laminated badge. And the thing about wild things, they always test the boundaries twice. Janice had gone completely dark since the recall vote. No statements, no social posts, not even an attempt to spin the narrative. Until she did. It happened on a slow Thursday morning. I was out mixing concrete with Troy and a few volunteers, reinforcing the last section of the barrier down near the creek bed. That's when my phone buzzed. Again and again. Texts, voicemails, screenshots, all saying the same thing. Turn on the local news. Janice's going live. We paused work, dust still on our gloves, and crowded around a phone propped against a post bucket. There she was, Janice Mallory, standing in front of the old HOA clubhouse, flanked by 2 remaining board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Her hair was immaculate, her voice syrupy sweet, laced with thorns. "We're doing everything we can to protect this community," she said into the mic. "But unfortunately, Not everyone has acted with the same level of responsibility. She didn't say my name. She didn't have to. She gestured vaguely toward the tree line. There have been unregulated barriers, non-standard landscaping choices, a pattern of resistance to community safety planning. And then came the line that turned my stomach. Private choices can have public consequences. That was it. Their final tactic, blame reversal, the old playbook, turn the protector into the villain, reframe accountability as disruption. I didn't get angry. Not anymore. Instead, I stayed up that night and did what I always done when something needed fixing. I built something, not out of wood or wire, but words. I wrote a public statement, structured like a court filing, calm, detailed, meticulous. I included everything. Photos of the original barrier, my emails to the HOA, the cease and desist letter, wildlife services documentation, no, Lynn's body cam report, assigned, statement from Karen, drone footage from Troy's nephew showing the breach, Lena 50 printed copies, one taped to the old bulletin board, the rest slid into mailboxes, and one PDF link uploaded to every social group in the county. Within 2 hours to 300 downloads. By noon. Thousands. By dinner. It was everywhere. That evening. Someone taped a hand-painted sign to the now defunct HOA door we see through. Another was planted directly across Genesis' front lawn. You tore down a barrier and unleashed us instead. And that's when it became something more than full out. It became a reckoning. People who'd been quietly punished for years began speaking. The retired Marine who'd been fined for flying his U.S. flag 1 inch too far from his porch beam. The single mom who'd been harassed over having a plastic watering can on her front step. Even the elderly couple who'd once been cited in writing for having unauthorized ivy on a fence older than the HOA itself. They spoke at the next town hall, and the next, and the one after that. And the stories weren't just complaints, they were wounds. But this time, they weren't asking for permission, they were asking for change. And we gave it to them. Together. Sandra created a legal aid fund for residents wrongfully fined under previous board rulings. Carlos offered to represent anyone retaliated against for speaking up. Nolan worked with the sheriff's office to draft a report template for unlawful HOA enforcement. Pine Hollow was no longer just recovering. It was rebuilding something stronger than before. And through it all, I kept doing what I'd done from the beginning. Walking the line, watching the trees, fixing what could be fixed, and letting go of what couldn't, except for the truth. Because that stays. The courtroom felt colder this time. Maybe it was the November wind slipping through the hallway cracks. Or maybe it was something else. The weight of what was about to happen. This wasn't a civil hearing. This was criminal. The people v. Janice, Mallory, Carlos, and I sat at the long table near the front. He was calm, as always, flipping through exhibits with the precision of a man who'd waited his whole career for a case this clear. Me. I wasn't nervous. I was ready. Behind us. The seats filled quickly. Familiar faces. Troy, Sandra, Nolan, parents, gardeners, grandparents, the ones who had been fined, silenced, pushed, and shamed. Not a crowd for drama, a crowd for justice. Judge Peterson entered, her robe trailing like a thundercloud. She took her seat with the same no-nonsense presence. As before, Janice arrived last. She looked smaller, not just thinner, smaller, like power had been peeled off her, layer by layer, until only posture remained. Her attorney whispered something. She nodded once, eyes forward, lips pursed. The charges were read aloud: criminal trespass, willful destruction of private property, negligent endangerment, fraudulent contracting for personal gain. Pled not guilty to all. The prosecutor went first. They didn't need flair. They had proof. Body cam footage, HOA invoices, financial records, witness testimony, Janice's own emails, the ones where she mocked the wildlife reports, called the barrier Brody's backwoods obsession, and encouraged the board to move fast before he has time to lawyer up. Carlos kept it simple. He stood up, nodded respectfully to the court, and turned to face the gallery. This case is not about aesthetics. It is not about fence height or neighborhood standards. He said, it is about abuse, about what happens when authority forgets its purpose. He paused. Let the silence breathe. It is about a woman who treated community leadership like a crown instead of a contract, who tore down safety barriers, ignored ecological warnings, and when the consequences arrived, she did not take responsibility. She pointed fingers. Carlos turned to Janice then. She pointed them, the one man who tried to protect the community, and called him the danger. Guests didn't echo this time. They sank, because by now, everyone knew. Janice's attorney fumbled through a defense, claimed the board lacked proper environmental education, said Janice was pressured by community members to enforce aesthetics, even tried to imply I was partially responsible for escalating tension. That's when Judge Peterson leaned forward. You mean the plaintiff who sent formal warnings, who filed proper documentation, who contacted wildlife services and offered solutions while your client bulldozed his land without due process? The defense attorney stammered. No further argument. The judge said sharply. Then she turned to Janice. Miss Mallory, do you have anything you wish to say before I render judgment? Janice stood. Her voice, for once, was not sharp. It was small. I thought I was doing what was best for the community. She said, I didn't mean for things to go so far. Judge Peterson's jaw tightened. This was not a mistake. This was a series of deliberate decisions. You ignored warnings, violated legal orders, you weaponized policy, and when your actions endangered lives, you blamed the very people you failed to protect. A beat of silence. Then the gavel came down. I find the defendant guilty on all counts. The sentence wasn't theatrical. It didn't need to be. 6 months of community service, mandatory, restitution of all misused funds, probation with restriction from serving on any community board for 10 years, and a permanent injunction barring her from any further contact with my land. As the judge stood, the room remained quiet, but the stillness this time wasn't heavy. It was clean. It was done. After court, I stepped outside alone. The wind was different. Not soft, not sharp, just clear. Carlos joined me a moment later. You okay? He asked. I nodded. I didn't come here for punishment, I said. Just protection. For what matters. He smiled. You got both. That weekend, we held the final rebuild gathering at the edge of the forest. Not just to fortify the barrier, but to celebrate. Emma helped plant flowers around the bench. Sandra brought hot cider. Nolan grilled sausages in the back of his truck. And Troy, he raised a handmade wooden sign over the path. It read, this way, we protect each other. There were no speeches, just laughter, tools clinking, dogs chasing kids round the clearing, and me, standing at the gate, hand resting on the still ledge, watching the sun sink through the trees. Later that evening, after the crowd drifted home and the stars crept in, I walked the line alone one last time. Boots soft on the earth, wine low through the needles. The forest felt peaceful again, not because it was tame, but because it was respected. I paused at the eastern post. The same one Sarah helped me drive into the ground all those years ago, her initials still carved faintly on the inside. Weathered but strong, I crouched down and planted the last piece, a potted violet from Emma's mom, who told me it was for the man who built a barrier and a bridge. I stayed there for long while. And then, just before turning back, I whispered not to the trees, or the wind, or even to Sarah, but to myself, we're safe. Not just from wild boars, not just from HOA overreach. But from forgetting what matters. Because a boundary isn't just where something ends. It's where something begins, when we choose to defend it. Together, that's what Pine Hollow became. Not perfect, not polished, but real. Rooted. And ready.